Well, hello there. So, this is Dr. Doug Knieven. I think that most of you are pretty familiar with him. I'm Chelsea Kent, and today we are going to talk about prescription pet foods. And we are just going to kind of throw out some of the thoughts that we have about them, help people learn a little bit more so that they can make educated decisions and just have a conversation. So, do you want to start? Is there anything that you're just itching to say?
Oh boy. Um, well, as a Western trained veterinarian, um, I was educated in the use of prescription diets and commercial diets in general. Educated, indoctrinated, I'm not sure exactly what the difference is there, but I think one thing that a lot of people may not realize is how um, pervasive the big pet food companies are in veterinary education. So,
Mhm.
for instance, um, many of the nutritionists that teach at veterinary schools, they have to get their extra education paid for somehow, and a lot of them actually have it paid for by one of the major pet food companies.
Hmm.
So the teacher who's teaching veterinary students is, possibly having been paid by the major pet food companies. The textbook that veterinarian students learn about nutrition from was written by Hills. The teaching hospital where they learn how to be a veterinarian gets free pet food from one of the major pet food companies. Who has money to spend on research on pet nutrition? The major pet food companies. And who has money to sponsor continuing education in nutrition? The major pet food companies.
Yeah.
So we come into this world of veterinary medicine with a very biased view of what nutrition looks like.
I definitely want to come back to the money thing in just a second, but what is that conversation like when that first comes up? Is that something that like there's a moment where you're first introduced into kind of that world, and is it like a rep that comes into a classroom and is like, "Hey, let me tell you about the products," and they just do like a product overview, or do they just hand you the guide and they're like, "This is everything you need to know"?
You know what? I have to say, I graduated from veterinary school in 1987, and I don't really know for sure how that dynamic works these days. When
Mhm.
I was there, we actually didn't get free pet food from the major pet food companies and so forth. I know that's happening since I was in school. So I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but I think probably both of those scenarios play out in different settings.
Mhm. And when it comes to learning, is it like there's just posters about the big pet food companies that make prescriptions and about the science and marketing words? Like, is it something where it's like subliminal messaging just going on all the time, or is it very much like, hey, let's have this discussion about how fascinating this stuff is?
Well, nutrition education in veterinary school is very much based on nutrients. Like if you talk to a nutritionist, they'll say that the ingredients don't matter, it's just the nutrients. It doesn't matter where those nutrients come from. So that's kind of the baseline training. Most veterinary students spend some time at veterinary practices, and those practices generally carry the prescription diet. So they're kind of, we learn about it subliminally just in everyday life in practice as we're learning to be veterinarians.
Mhm.
I'm not really, again, I'm not sure exactly how it works in vet schools these days.
Mhm. So it is accurate that like ingredients are going to contain macronutrients, and macronutrients are going to contain micronutrients with vitamins and minerals. However, that kind of a sweeping statement can be pretty misleading. So can you describe to people like where maybe you started with that initially and where you've come to now?
Huh. Well, I have to say that early on when I was in practice, and this was back you know, in the late 90s, I would have clients come in that were feeding raw food, and I didn't understand why. I mean, it's food, you cook it, it's raw, what's the difference? And it really wasn't until someone turned me on to raw food for a dog that I had, and this was not a veterinarian, this was, you know, a pet owner who was making raw food here locally. And I had just recently acquired a dog that had demodectic mange systemically. So the demodectic mange is not something dogs catch. It's something that their body is not keeping under control because their immune system isn't working properly. And and I tried raw food on him, and first of all, he didn't die, which is kind of the way I was educated would happen. And and he actually got better. And then, you know, so it was from personal experience that I made the switch. But as far as the idea of nutrients versus ingredients, I would say that if we veterinarians had 100% complete understanding of diet and nutrition, that yes, then we could make that statement. But because we don't know everything that there is to know about diet and nutrition, to me, it makes more sense to start with the evolutionary diet that animals were eating, that the ancestors of our pets ate.
Mhm.
Start with that and balance it from there using research rather than starting with ingredients that they were never meant to eat and then trying to balance it from there.
Mhm.
So that's kind of my philosophy on that part.
That's great. Yeah, my background, I participated in the Know Your Pet Food initiative with Pause for Change, and that was laboratory analysis of 214 line items of nutrition. It was nutrients and contaminants that are in 5 of the most popular pet foods that are on the market. And it was so enlightening and fascinating to me because, you know, we were looking individually at, like, if you have a synthetic vitamin mineral premix and you're just tossing that in, which is sold with a skull and crossbones on it, then what does that look like in the end product? Is that safe? Are there concerns? And how does that align with what we believe that we know and what regulation says? And, like, for example, the one of the most mind-blowing things to me was in humans, iron intake of 60 mg per kg is considered lethal, and 10 mg per kg in dry matter is what regulation requires in pet food. So that's the minimum that you can do. And the highest one that we found was 1200 mg per kg. And nobody cares because there's not a
Wow.
maximum to it. So I'm like,
Right.
okay, to say that we have a nutrient and it is a necessary nutrient and a beneficial nutrient and that that's good enough is entirely misleading. Like, that's so unfair to a pet parent because that's going to cause intestinal inflammation. That's going to cause problems with the heart. Like, there's so many issues with getting levels that high and then feeding out from there. In the regulatory handbook, the AFCO book, it has a page that's dedicated to just the expected contaminant levels of heavy metals in alignment with each mineral.
Hmm.
So, like, high iron levels, it's most likely to also be high in lead and arsenic, and it perfectly aligned with
Wow.
each one of those things. So again, it's like we might know that if you have high selenium, you're also going to have high mercury. And we might say, well, you should do a dilution because you need this nutrient and that's important. But that doesn't mean that we're just good to go. Like, let's we got it in there. Like, let's just move on, you know?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's really fascinating to me. And then there's also the factor of mineral uptake. So, you know, I co-own Parsley Pet, which is HTMA analysis. And, you know, with that, you can compare that to regulation. And something like copper, for example, regulation says that absorption of copper is between 10 and 90%.
Hmm. That's a pretty
Okay,
wide range.
that's a very wide range. So what is it? And looking at the actual uptake. Is there copper deficiency in raw fed dogs that don't have added ridiculously high levels of copper? No, there's not. So to say, oh, well, it's an inadequate amount that you're providing according to science. Well, like, what about all the other variables? So,
Right, right.
yeah.
Yeah. It's very reductionistic and yeah, in their way of
Mhm.
thinking of nutrition. And like I say, it just makes more sense to try to mimic the ancestral diet rather than start with weird ingredients that they were never meant to eat.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
we're
I know of
definitely in
one,
alignment there.
right. I know of one raw food company that uses, I think it's vitamin B50 or vitamin B51. And, if you think about vitamins, then you go like vitamin D, vitamin K, like you skip certain ones, and people don't really consider like what happened to all the other ones. There
Hmm.
are other components of food that have been identified, but science is like, we're not really sure what that's for. So let's just not talk about it. So what, yeah, exactly. So what are we not providing in science? And like, I always go back to this bumblebee study. Apparently scientists made a bee pollen out of every known nutritional component. So just a scientific blend. And when they fed it to bees, they all died. So it just, it indicates like, we just don't know enough. So
Right.
nature really is the best default. It's the way of saying we can do a good job and not know everything.
Yeah. Right. And then when you get to the idea of prescription diets, it's like compounded on top of that because you have this idea that this is some FDA regulated drug that
Mhm.
requires a prescription when it's just total BS.
Yeah, so there, I do want to point out to everybody, there are no pharmaceuticals or DEA regulated ingredients that are in prescription pet foods. So that's valuable when you're like, what am I paying for? So I actually, with Solutions, went through the process of what would it take to become a prescription pet food, starting out with knowing that if you email any Department of Agriculture official and you ask them what's the difference between grocery store pet food and prescription pet food, they'll tell you they're just that one makes medical claims and one doesn't. There's no other difference. It's just strictly a marketing term. So, taking it from there, I was like, okay, so how do you get that then? So first thing, you have to register the products as a new animal drug. So it's not registered as food. And the only things that you have to commit to is that it has to be the same active ingredient. It has to be the same concentration. It has to be the same dosage and the same route of administration in every product. So if you look at the ingredient panel of a prescription kibble, like I know of one where the first ingredient is cornstarch. So
Sure.
yeah, if you add water to cornstarch, it's gonna be a very gelatinous consistency. And if you have diarrhea in your pet, it's gonna cover it up real well. Does that make it medicinal? Yeah. So I think that that's pretty limited. And then just going back to that financial money aspect of it, continuing down, what does it look like to register as a prescription drug? I found that in 2022, to become a prescription pet food, each individual product would cost $1,174,651 to
Hmm.
register. And
Wow.
then the annual fees are $303,798.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a pay to play game. And if anybody wants to look up who is registered, you can go to the FDA's FDA.gov, their website, and look up the Green Book, and you can look up medicated feeds or approved medicated feed mill licenses, and it has a list of everybody that's paying for that. But a small
Interesting.
company, it doesn't mean that they aren't doing those same things and being consistent with their ingredients or using things that the body would utilize as medicine. But the chances that they want to charge you that much more are pretty low.
Right, right. And
So,
I hate to really bash the major pet food companies. I mean, they do a lot of research. In fact, I went to I got myself invited to Hills one year. I don't remember, it has to be 6 or 8 years ago. And so they pay vets to fly them out to Hills to their place in Topeka, Kansas, and you get free CE, you get free meals, free hotel, and 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 you get their spiel. But it was funny because the very first night they had this kind of introductory dinner, and so they went around the room, and the idea was that you were supposed to say your name and talk about um, oh shoot, I forget, kind of the pet food that you're feeding your animal. And so it became, which Hill's prescription diet are you feeding your pet? And oh, and they were also saying, why is it that you wanted to come to this program? And there was probably about 50 people in the room. Two of these people said, because I want to find out more about why people are feeding raw food. And this was like 6 or 8 years ago. And so during this whole time, I was trying to think, well, geez, do I come? My whole plan was to go incognito. Like I'm just a regular vet and I'm here to, schmooze and learn. But then there was part of me who said, no, you can't be fake. You have to say what you're feeding your animals. That's what we're all about. So I kept going back and forth in my mind. Should I say it? Should I not say that I'm feeding raw? And wouldn't you know, I was the very last person in this line of people as they're swirling around the room. And so at the very end, I got up and said, my name is Dr. Doug Knieven, and I'm one of those crazy people that feeds raw food. And the very next day, we had dinner, and two of the Hills veterinarians sat on either side of me at the dinner table. And they were very interested in why, their first question was, don't you believe in research? And I said, sure, I believe in research. Show me research on pet nutrition that isn't sponsored by a pet food company. And I said to them, what would you think if you went to your doctor and they told you to eat, people chow, and that's all you need to eat? And they said, oh, that would be great because I'd know exactly how much food to eat so I wouldn't gain weight. It was like we were just speaking two different languages.
Mhm.
It was interesting. But
Yeah,
anyway, they do a lot of research, and that's what convinces vets that these diets are what's best.
yeah.
But then veterinarians even misunderstand the way to use these diets. Like
Mhm.
Hills has a liver diet, but it's made for dogs that are having um, liver causing, if the liver is disease is causing brain problems. Um,
Mhm.
and so it's low in protein. And some veterinarians are like, well, it's liver diet. If the enzymes are high, I put them on this. It doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yep, definitely. Yeah, actually earlier today I was referencing a Hills study, and there's a few of them that I referenced, but this one in particular, it was on validating that ketogenic diets do have a beneficial effect on seizures. And it very much was like, we're not saying that you should do a ketogenic diet, but we can say that we can't refute that there's efficacy in the science behind it. And there's been some longevity studies before that are great to reference, but I've also seen some where, and it's definitely not just prescription pet food companies, but like the statistics are skewed where they're referencing the minority as a result. So if you look at it the opposite, you're like, that's really saying the opposite of what you're promoting. So it kind of goes both ways. So yeah, it definitely comes back to, what are your goals, and use that research to align with whoever's helping you to get there.
Right, right.
Yeah. So when you're working with pet owners and maybe they've been feeding a prescription food and they're thinking, maybe I want to try a more holistic route, is there anything that you see really sticks for them on sticking with one or switching to a fresh diet?
Well, usually when people come to me, they're coming to me because what they're doing isn't working. If what
Mhm.
they're doing was working, they wouldn't be seeking me out. And for me, nutrition is kind of the basis of health. If you don't have a healthy diet, you can't be healthy no matter what else you do, in my view. So usually they're primed to switch, and it doesn't take much to convince them that maybe a different way, a different approach might work better. And sometimes I go at it as, let's just give this a try and see. If something doesn't work out, you can always switch back. Unless it's some kind of really serious problem where we could send it over the edge for changing the diet. But in most cases, if I approach it as, let's just give this a try, that's a way into to some people who might be hesitant.
Mhm. Well, that's great. Yeah, is there anything else that you want to say to people about prescription diets or raw diets or anything?
Oh God, I could go on all day about raw diets,
I
but
know.
uh, I think we covered the salient points for prescription diets.
Great. All right. Well, I'm sure that we will reconvene for some future episodes. And in the meantime, I hope you have a really awesome day.
Thanks. You too, Chelsea. Good to see
Thanks.
you.
You too.